Have you ever wondered what happens to a soul that dies slowly, not in one moment of dramatic sin, but across years of silent indifference? Can a marriage blessed by God become a tomb where two souls perish together, not through hatred, but through the quiet erosion of everything that once made them alive? And is there a warning hidden in the visions of a 19th century saint that reveals exactly how this slow death unfolds? In 1868, on the night of April 17th, a priest in Turin, Italy, woke screaming. His hand was blistered and swollen, the skin peeled away in sheets. His assistant rushed into the room and found Don Bosco, Giovanni Bosco, the father of orphans, the friend of street children, pale and trembling against the headboard. He had just returned from hell, not a dream, not a metaphor. A vision so real that when his guide forced his hand against the outer wall of that place, the burn mark stayed on his flesh for days. He showed him the mechanics of damnation, how souls fall, what traps them. And among all the visions Pope Pius IX ordered him to write down, one detail appears again and again in his spiritual letters, his instructions, his warnings to married couples and families. The soul dies slowest when it forgets to feel. She had confessed to him a condition she called tepidity, lukewarmness, a coldness in prayer, dryness toward God. Nothing dramatic, no mortal sin, just the slow withdrawal of feeling, the quiet conviction that the fire had gone out. Don Bosco's response was precise. Tepidity, he wrote, when it is not promoted by the will, should be totally free of guilt. But if the will allows it, if the soul cooperates with the cooling, then lukewarmness becomes the name of spiritual death. The Church calls it a channel through which divine grace flows from God to humanity. 7 sacraments, 7 rivers. And marriage is one. But what happens when the channel dries? When husband and wife, bound by vows spoken before heaven, allow the slow leak of indifference to drain every drop of life from the bond they swore to keep. It's the best way to support this work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and based on primary sources, including the biographical memoirs of Saint John Bosco, published by the Salesian Society, Dreams, Visions, and Prophecies of Don Bosco, edited by Eugene Brown from Don Bosco Publications, and the original spiritual letters archived at the Salesian Historical Institute in Rome, which house Don Bosco's autograph writings on tepidity, mortal sin, and the sacraments. These are not popular summaries. These are the documents the saint himself wrote and the visions he recorded under obedience to the Pope. The letters from 1866 on spiritual lukewarmness, the vision recorded on May 3, 1868 about the snares of hell, the biographical testimonies sworn under oath by John Bosco and other witnesses, these form the foundation of what you're hearing. Now back to the information. The most frightful, but also the most salutary of these dreams occurred on Friday, April 10th. He tried to avoid sleep. He sat at his desk browsing through books until midnight. The mere thought of having more nightmares thoroughly scared me, he wrote, but exhaustion won. He set his pillow upright against the headboard and practically sat up, trying not to fall asleep. But soon he did. Immediately, the same person from the night before appeared at his bedside. The guide. Don Bosco never named him with certainty. It may have been an angel, he said, or a deceased pupil, or St. Francis de Sales, or some other saint, but the guide was real, and the guide had authority. Get up and follow me, the guide commanded. Don Bosco protested. For heaven's sake, leave me alone. I'm exhausted. I've been tormented by a toothache for several days and need rest. But the guide did not relent, and Don Bosco, obedient even in terror, rose and followed. The road seemed flat and comfortable. Don Bosco noted that it imperceptibly sloped downward. Although it did not seem very steep, he moved with such ease that it seemed he was being carried by the wind. And behind him, following, were the boys of his oratory. He recognized them. He knew their names, and he saw them stumble, fall, and get dragged by an unseen force toward a frightful drop in the distance, a slope that led into a furnace. In his vision of April 1868, Don Bosco saw boys from his oratory walking a beautiful road. Roses lined the path. The ground seemed flat and easy, but it sloped downward, imperceptibly, so gently that the boys didn't notice the descent until they were running, carried by momentum they no longer controlled, straight toward the mouth of a furnace. Don Bosco watched them fall. He saw the traps, invisible cords, snares labeled pride, disobedience, impurity, sloth, anger, gluttony. But the trap that pulled the most souls, the one he noted with particular horror, was the trap of human respect. The fear of what others think, the unwillingness to do what is right because it might look strange, feel uncomfortable, disrupt the routine. Others hung at eye level. All were well concealed. The boys, unaware of their danger, got caught and tripped. They sprawled to the ground, legs in the air. Then, when they managed to get back on their feet, they would run headlong down the road toward the abyss. Don Bosco discovered that each trap had an inscription: pride, the first and most deadly. The trap that made boys think they knew better than their teachers, better than their confessors, better than God. Disobedience, the refusal to submit, the insistence on autonomy, envy, the poison of comparison, the bitterness of seeing another succeed, the entertainment of thoughts, the indulgence of images, the small steps that seemed harmless until the cord tightened and the soul was dragged, theft, gluttony, the disorder of appetite, anger, the explosion of rage that destroys relationships, sloth, the spiritual laziness that refuses effort, and then, most insidious of all, human respect. The trap that catches souls who know what is right but refuse to do it because of what others might think. And in marriage, this trap looks like the couple who stop praying together because it feels awkward, who stop going to confession because they don't want to admit struggle, who stop asking for help because they fear judgment, who maintain the appearance of a perfect marriage while inside both are drowning. But somewhere, unnoticed, the slope begins. He stops praying with her. She stops asking. He forgets to notice when she's hurt. She stops mentioning it. Small things. One conversation avoided. One reconciliation delayed. One Sunday Mass skipped because they were tired. One argument left unresolved because bringing it up again feels awkward. The descent is so gentle. In human respect, the fear of appearing too religious, too emotional, too needy, too demanding wraps around their throats like a cord they cannot see. But his guide pointed to the room beyond the veil, and Don Bosco saw boys he knew, boys from the oratory, writhing in spiritual agony. The guide explained, "Riches do not mean only money. The heart can attach to material objects, to comfort, to status, to the approval of others, and this disordered affection distances the soul from God. But when he comes home, he has nothing left. No attention for his wife, no patience for the children, no energy for prayer. His heart is attached to the work, to the image of himself as provider, as successful, as respected. He is rich in exhaustion and poor in presence. His wife, alone, turns to her phone, her friends, her hobbies, anything to fill the silence. She does not hate him. She does not betray him. She just stops expecting him to notice, and in that quiet resignation, her soul begins to die. No communion, no connection, forever severed from love. Above its high door was an ominous inscription. Here there is no redemption. Don Bosco recoiled, but the guide directed him to witness a young man rushing toward this door. His appearance was marked by terror and desperation. Despite Don Bosco's impulse to help, he was held back by the guide, who explained that those fleeing from God's wrath could not be stopped. Inside were other doors, and from them released globes of fire. The fire engulfed the young man and dragged him into the abyss. Don Bosco wanted to scream, to pull the boy back, but it was too late. The door slammed shut, and Don Bosco understood. This is what it looks like when a soul, living in mortal sin, dies unrepentant. No second chances, no negotiation. The choice was made in life, and death fixed it forever. The guide led Don Bosco through a horrible corridor. It led to a vast, tenebrous patio. At the back of this patio, he saw a dreadful-looking little gate. On it were written the words from Matthew chapter 25, verse 41. "The wicked will go to the everlasting fire." Don Bosco felt such intense dread that he drew back. But then he thought, only those who are already judged fall into hell, and I have yet to be judged. Courage filled him. He followed the guide through the gate. Degree by degree, a husband who refuses to forgive, a wife who withholds affection. Not once, in anger, but as policy, as punishment, as control. This is not dramatic betrayal, this is strategy. And the soul that strategizes against love is a soul that has already begun to freeze. On the first veil was written an inscription from Exodus chapter 20, verse 5. "I am the Lord your God, a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation." The guide lifted the veil. Inside the room, Don Bosco saw boys he recognized, boys from his oratory. They were not dead, they were alive, but they were in a state of mortal sin. And if they died in that state, this room would be their eternal dwelling. But as the veil lifted, he saw a group of boys, all known to him. They were in pain, like those he had seen before. The guide pointed to them and remarked, "As you see, the inscription does apply to your boys. Another cannot stop thinking about food. Another is consumed with desire for nicer clothes. The attachment itself, the guide explained, is the trap, not the object, the heart's refusal to let go." And Don Bosco understood, riches are not only money, riches are anything the soul loves more than God. And in marriage, riches can be control, comfort, appearance, the children, the career, even the idea of marriage itself, loved more than the spouse, more than God, more than the vow. The couple stays together, they do not divorce, they fulfill the external form of the sacrament. But inside, both are alone. Not the gentle touch of a feather, but the blunt force of honesty that breaks the trap. He said this, "If you want to be lukewarm, make few visits to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. If you want to be good, make many visits. If you want to be very good, make very many visits. If you want your marriage to be good, make many visits. Ask questions. Listen fully. Sit together in silence without the television. Pray together, even if it feels awkward. If you want your marriage to be very good, make very many visits, every day, every hour. Small touches, small words, the constant returning of attention to the person you vowed to cherish. On February 1st, 1865, Don Bosco announced to his boys that one of them would die soon. He knew because he had seen it in a dream the night before. On March 16th, Anthony Ferraris passed away after receiving the last sacraments. John Bosco, who helped Anthony and his mother during Anthony's final hours, later testified under oath. Don Bosco told us many other dreams concerning oratory boys' deaths. We believed them to be true prophecies. We still do, because unfailingly they came true. During the 7 years I lived at the oratory, not a boy died without Don Bosco predicting his death. We were also convinced that whoever died there under his care and assistance surely went to heaven. He could perceive the spiritual condition of a person standing before him, whether they were in grace or in mortal sin, whether they were advancing or retreating, whether they were alive or already dying inside. Witnesses reported that he would sometimes stop mid-conversation, look at a boy and say, "You need to go to confession now." And the boy, terrified and humbled, would confess sins he thought were hidden. What if Don Bosco stood before a married couple today? What would he see? Would he see two souls united in grace, growing together toward God? Or would he see two people bound by law but separated by silence, living in the same house but inhabiting different worlds, breathing the same air but dying the same slow death? My Jesus, mercy. Lord, I trust in you. Mary, help me. Words thrown like sparks into dry wood, visits to the Blessed Sacrament, physical movement toward God, the body teaching the soul to return, and kissing the crucifix or medal, a concrete act of affection toward a concrete representation of divine love. He understood that the soul follows the body, that love, even when it feels dead, can be rekindled through small, repeated physical acts. A husband who feels nothing for his wife can still bring her coffee. A wife who feels distant from her husband can still touch his shoulder as she passes. These are not lies, these are investments, sparks thrown into the cold. Don Bosco wrote, "The thought that tribulations, pains, and dryness of spirit are so many fragrant roses for eternity," meaning this: the struggle to love, when love feels absent, is not wasted effort. It is merit. It is the soul refusing to cooperate with its own death. Separation from God is real, and the walls are not far. They are closer than we think. Of decisions made separately, of nights spent back to back in the same bed, close in body but infinite in distance. And separation, if it continues, if it hardens, if it becomes the permanent state, is hell. Devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, especially through frequent Holy Communion. Devotion to the Blessed Virgin, confession. Devotion to Saint Joseph, Saint Aloysius, and other saints. Each one a specific, concrete practice. Not vague good intentions, not someday resolutions, practices. Weekly confession, daily prayer, monthly spiritual reading, physical acts that interrupt the descent. Making the date night non-negotiable. Praying the rosary together even when it feels mechanical. Going to confession separately and then, humbled, returning to each other with softer hearts. Reading scripture aloud before bed. Fasting together on Fridays. Small practices, concrete, repeated. The kind that feel awkward at first but become, over time, the structure that holds the soul in place when feeling fails. Don Bosco saw boys running toward hell, dragged by invisible cords, and he saw others stop mid-run, grab a knife, cut the cord, and climb back up the slope. The difference was not intelligence. It was not even virtue in the usual sense. It was willingness to use the tools. And the boy who knew about confession but never went still fell. The boy who went, even reluctantly, even imperfectly, was saved. A marriage can know all the right answers and still die. The couple can agree that communication is important, that prayer is essential, that love is a choice, and still drift into separate lives. Knowing is not enough. Doing is the difference. And doing when the heart is cold, when the feeling is gone, when every word feels forced, is the exact moment when merit is earned. Because love, at that moment, is no longer emotion. It is will. It is the decision to move toward the other, even when every instinct says retreat. Concrete devotions. The Eucharist, Mary, the Pope, points of return, places to go when the soul begins to wander. Just as he had known the deaths of his boys decades earlier, he knew his own end approached. Before his death, he wrote what became known as his Spiritual Testament, a document preserved in the Salesian archives, titled Memories from 1841 to 1884, 85, 86, for the sacrament Giovanni Bosco to his Salesian sons. In it, he wrote with the most ardent affection of his soul, thanking his sons for their obedience. "I leave you here on earth," he wrote, "but only for a short time. I hope the infinite mercy of God will enable us all to meet one day in heaven. There I await you. Do not grieve over my death. This is a debt we must all pay. But afterwards, every fatigue sustained for the love of our Master, the good Jesus, will be greatly rewarded." Instead of weeping, make firm and efficacious resolutions to remain staunch in your vocation until death. The reasoning that says this life is too hard, too demanding, too lonely. He had seen boys leave the oratory, convinced they would find happiness elsewhere. And he had seen, in vision after vision, where that path led, not always to dramatic ruin, sometimes to quiet, respectable, lukewarm lives, lives that looked fine from the outside, but inside were tombs, cold, dark, alone. For married couples, the anchors might be different in form, but identical in function. The Eucharist, yes, always. But also the weekly conversation, the monthly retreat, the annual renewal of vows, the decision to seek counsel when conflict becomes chronic, the willingness to name the problem instead of pretending it doesn't exist. These are not optional luxuries for couples who feel close. These are life support for couples who are dying. Don Bosco wrote extensively about the sacraments. In his book, The Catholic Provided, published in 1847, he explained to young people that the 7 sacraments are like 7 channels with which heavenly favors are communicated from divinity to humanity. Baptism, confirmation, Eucharist, penance, extreme unction, holy orders, and marriage, 7 rivers of grace. Marriage, he wrote, is a sensitive sign established by God to give our souls the graces that are necessary to save us. Not just graces for ourselves, graces for each other. The husband receives grace to love his wife as Christ loved the church. The wife receives grace to respect and support her husband. The sacrament itself, when received worthily, becomes a source of ongoing strength. When they receive the sacrament once, on their wedding day, and then never return to the wellspring, the grace is still there. The channel is still open. But if they do not visit, if they do not pray, if they do not confess, if they do not receive the Eucharist together, the flow diminishes to a trickle, not because God withdraws, but because they stop receiving. And a soul that stops receiving grace begins to starve, slowly, imperceptibly, like a plant that gets just enough water to survive, but never enough to bloom. But his soul, burning, alive, awake, passed into the hands of the God he had served with every ounce of strength. The answer was never. He prayed every moment of his life, not just with words, with attention, with presence, with the constant turning of his heart toward God. Take refuge often at the feet of Jesus. My dear ones, the visit to the Blessed Sacrament is an extremely necessary way to conquer the devil. Therefore, go often to visit Jesus, and the devil will not come out victorious against you. If you want to be very good, make very many visits. The formula was simple. Proximity to Jesus equals heat. Distance from Jesus equals cold. And cold, when it settles, becomes death. He also said, were it not for the Blessed Virgin and the Blessed Sacrament, the world would now be in ruins. Those who want to work in the light, that is, along the way to heaven, must draw closer to these 2 sources of light, or at least one of them. Those who walk away from them move in darkness and in the shadow of death. Praying the rosary together, even when it feels mechanical, even when the mind wanders because the act itself is prayer, and Mary hears even distracted prayers. Reading scripture together before bed, fasting together on Fridays, making a pilgrimage together once a year, visiting a shrine, sitting in adoration. The practices matter, not as magic, not as earning, but as positioning. They position the soul in proximity to grace. And proximity to grace is warmth, and warmth is life. Souls yanked from the brink and set on fire with love. And when the grace stops flowing, the bond that once gave life becomes the tomb where 2 souls perish together, not in hatred, but in the quiet, cold, cooperative silence of 2 people who forgot to fight for each other. The willingness to feel awkward, to risk rejection, to speak when silence feels safer, to move when stillness feels easier. This is the knife. This is the hammer. This is the tool Don Bosco saw scattered along the road to hell, placed there by a providential hand, waiting for the soul willing to use it. They grabbed the knife while they were still tangled, still afraid, still falling. They cut while the cord was tight, and the cord, when severed, lost its power. The trap, once broken, could not hold. One choice to stop cooperating with the slow death and start clawing back toward life. Call it what you wish. But the burns were real. The deaths he predicted came true. The boys he saved stayed saved. And the warning remains. Souls die slowly when they stop choosing love. Marriages die slowly when 2 people, blessed by God, bound by vows, decide that silence is easier than honesty, that distance is safer than closeness, that indifference is less painful than the risk of being hurt again. It is only slower, and slow death is still death. He lived turned toward God. Every action was prayer. Every conversation was ministry. Every moment was lived as if the next breath might be the last, and the soul must be ready. Unthinkable. What if husband and wife lived as Don Bosco lived, awake to the reality that souls are at stake, that the slow drift is real, that indifference kills, but love, chosen daily, hourly, moment by moment, saves. Attachment to comfort, lukewarmness. The tools are the same. Meditation, spiritual reading, devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, devotion to Mary, confession. The names change, the circumstances shift, but the mechanics of salvation and damnation remain constant. Or cooperate with the fall and call it peace. He would tell them that tepidity, when it is not promoted by the will, is not mortal sin, but when the will allows it, when the soul cooperates, when the coldness becomes policy, it is death, slow death, but death nonetheless. Because marriage is not the absence of struggle, it is the refusal to quit mid-struggle. It is the decision to use the tools even when they feel useless. It is the faith that grace still flows through the sacrament even when the couple cannot feel it. It is the hope that God, who blessed the union, will not abandon it. And it is the love, not of emotion, but of will, that says, I choose you again, today, despite everything, because we vowed before heaven that we would. Not while the tools are within reach, not while God still offers the sacrament of reconciliation, not while the Eucharist still burns on the altar, not while Mary still intercedes, not while one of you, even one, still wants to fight. And every single one who used the tool was saved.